Hello, everyone. Assuming everyone is here and they can see and hear me. My name is Catherine Davis. I'm the Associate Editor here at Chicago Inno, and welcome to our latest virtual event. Thank you all for tuning in. We really appreciate it. As a reminder, all of the attendees are on mute and you should be in listen-only mode. So for anyone that's unfamiliar with us and what we do, Chicago Inno is a local publication covering tech and startups in the city and its surrounding suburbs. We're part of a network of 14 publications which all cover tech and work to connect the people, companies, trends, and topics that are driving and defining each market, startup, and tech communities. So make sure to check us out at chicagoinno.com, and there you can sign up for The Beat, which is our daily email newsletter. In it, we talk about the latest startup news and events you need to know about. Also, thank you so much to our sponsor, Flatiron Schools. They provide 12 to 15-week skills courses for careers in software engineering, data science, and cybersecurity. So please consider checking them out at flatironschool.com. So let's just get to it. You're all here for the panel. I'm going to introduce today's moderator. If you're familiar with Chicago Tech at all, you've probably heard of Amanda Lannert. She is the CEO of Jellyvision, one of Chicago's most notable tech companies, not only because it makes an awesome product around health insurance transparency, but also because it has a reputation for having an amazing company culture. Amanda is the perfect person to moderate a panel on the future of work, simply because it's something I know she's been focused on at Jellyvision throughout the pandemic. So without further ado, I'm going to hop off and pass the mic to Amanda, and she's going to introduce our panelists. Take it away, Amanda.
Thank you so much. I am so excited for my Oprah moment, and thanks to Chicago Inno for letting me grab the mic. Just want to briefly set the stage for all of our listeners who I'm sure are living very much what I'm talking about. 2020 has been a year, and we're not even halfway through, technically speaking. In February, unemployment was about 3.5%, the lowest level it's been in 50 years. 2 months later, it's at an 80-year high, levels that haven't been seen since just after the Great Depression. 70% of American workers have now been personally financially impacted by COVID-19, either through a job loss, a salary cut, a furlough for themselves or a family member. And I work and have worked for the last 100+ days, either from my bed or from my couch in the basement, wearing sweatpants, exclusively sweatpants, and I'm probably not alone. And now Zoom fatigue is our day-to-day life. These would be enough were it not for then the protests that have happened in response to the unanswered murders for George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many other Black Americans. And these protests have forced a lot of leaders to look in the mirror and realize that inaction is complicity. So in the meantime, we are trying to create systemic changes in our organizations. These are uncomfortable times, but discomfort is where the growth happens. Chicago Inno has put together an unbelievable panel of some of my favorites to have a discussion about how this pressure cooker of a year is going to change perceptions and behaviors around work and the employer-employee relationship itself. And also, let's talk about how Chicago Tech as a community can come out of this stronger, wiser, and more helpful to each other. So joining us today, we've got Betsy Ziegler. Everybody knows Betsy, CEO of 1871, which has been recognized as the #1 private business incubator on the entire planet. And Betsy also is your go-to for karaoke, as she can rock out Young MC's Bust a Move. Oh. We also have the founder and CEO of Rheaply, an asset exchange platform that reduces procurement costs and diverts unnecessary waste from landfills. Garry is also a very generous mentor to fellow startup founders, and he has a PhD. So I think I have to introduce you as Dr. Garry Cooper. Is that right? Are you doctor?
No, you never have to, Amanda.
You're like, that's right. It's Dr. to you. We have Mike Gamson, formerly SVP of Global Solutions at LinkedIn, and now CEO of Relativity, which is hands down one of Chicago's stalwart tech companies. Mike is also, I think, well known as the patron saint of Chicago Tech. He has written scores of checks and remarkably is regarded as one of the most generous, helpful, and available leaders around.
Oh,
and last but not least, yeah, you really are. Like, your reputation is earned. And last but not least, we have Sonia Nagar, partner at Pritzker Group Venture Capital, whose investments include Wander Beauty, Interior Design, and Cameo, lucky you. And I'll just say Sonia can also host an excellent dinner party. So happy to. So great cross section here. We've got Garry, startups, Mike. I don't even know if you're growth stage. You're like established company. You have 1,200 employees.
1,200 employees. Growth stage, I think, is right.
Growth stage, so later growth stage. We got Betsy for events and incubation and Sonia for venture capital. That's our panel. Let's dive in. To kind of set the stage, what's the one thing that you've learned from going through a global pandemic as both a leader and a human being that surprised you the most? Start off with Mike.
Be ready to change your plans. You know, on March 5th, I thought my family and I were going on spring break. And by March 11th, we had shut down our offices globally. And about a week or so later said, for the rest of 2020, we're locked down. So be ready to change your plans.
Great lesson. Betsy.
Similarly, I think sort of resilience of my team in particular. I had deep faith and confidence in them no matter what, but they have really demonstrated enormous resilience. We went home on the afternoon of March 13th, and we just reopened last week for people that are on a volunteer basis. People can come back, and so I would say resilience for them. And I think for me, I've had a personal routine for 25 plus years, and that got disrupted pretty fast. And the first real marker of that was when I showed up to a Zoom call with soaking wet hair, and I thought, okay, like this is something I never would have done before. But my nothing bad happened, but it's just an athleisure, right? I was never really an athleisure person, but now I embrace Lululemon and not always perfectly, prepared. So that's been nice in many ways to have realized that you can survive that.
Are you going to revert? Are you going to go back to wearing fancy pants every day, or is it like we're going to see? I'm in
a dress today. I'm in a dress today, even though I'm sitting in my home office because I had my board meeting this morning. And so I think when I go to 1871, which I've been 3 times over the last 6 days, I've been in my old clothes. And but when I'm not there or not having a board meeting, I'll probably stick with the Lulu.
Sonia, what about you? How is this experience?
Yeah, I think I have 2 learnings, one from a social perspective and then one from a business perspective. From a social perspective, I feel like I love the Mr. Rogers quote, find the helpers. And when there are times of crisis, look for the people who are helping. And I've been happy to see people in the tech community stepping up to become helpers and being empowered by the moment we're in, and motivated to try and do things to change the status quo. So that's the social side. And then on the business side, and I guess this actually has some relative stuff in my personal life too, figuring out efficiency. Like I think my business has been spending that I've invested in on things they possibly didn't need to be spending on, rent, facilities, some of the fancy things startups will sometimes spend on. I've been impressed by some of the more nimble companies cutting leases and getting really aggressive about figuring out ways to redeploy that spend into other places. And personally, I'm not spending in half the places I used to be spending and realizing that they were not essential buckets to spend.
Great. And Garry.
Yep. So from a first-time founder and, on the way to growing startup, one of the things that's been important for me is just team support up and down the ladder. Normally, I'm the person who's trying to help everyone. What I found is that during these times, I've needed a lot of help from my team, both emotionally, but also just tactically and strategically. And so that's been kind of interesting for me to really learn that lesson, is that how important the team is to supporting the leader as much as the leader is important to supporting the team.
Awesome. Let's go a little bit further as we start to hear about the reopening, and you can actually go to a restaurant, I think, starting Friday in Chicago, and we're getting a sense of like dusting off offices and believing that we may actually leave our house at least temporarily again this year. What are some of the things that you've learned from COVID? You've already talked on a couple of things, but what else have you learned from COVID that you're going to bring back to work? I'll give you an example. I thought that showing up meant showing up in faces. I was a leader who thought I needed to walk around the office and be seen, and then I needed to go to the event to connect. And I am really enjoying having dinner with my family 7 nights a week instead of 2. which is what I told myself I needed to do to be a CEO of a tech company. And this more sort of modulated of like, we can do it, but we can do it virtually to save me the commute and save the time. Like, what are the things that you've learned around expenses we've got? What are other things that we're going to bring back to office life with us that we've learned during this time? Garry, what about you?
Yeah, so actually mine is one of the things that we've done that's very small, but that's actually added a lot of value to our team, is that we try to as much to have every conversation on open channels in Slack. So before, obviously I would have one-on-one conversations with folks, either in person or through direct message. And that just creates a lot of double talking and having to retell the same story. And so one of the things that we instituted about a month ago is having as many conversations as possible on open channels, which allows the entire team to understand what's actually happening in the company. So we've onboarded about 7 new faces at Rheaply since COVID started. So it's also incredibly important that those new faces are onboarding to some material, right? So that's one little small tactical thing that we've implemented that we will definitely have throughout post-COVID.
Are you going to go back to an office?
We are still debating that. So at this time, the answer is I'm not sure. And that's actually been an answer. I've reverted back to my scientific days of saying I just don't know. We're looking at the data. We're trying to learn from other companies in Chicago and see what they're doing, but I've not made up my mind yet, and the team is still kind of 50-50 on the proposition.
Mike, I'd love to jump to you. What are you going to bring back to work with you? And you have a lot of employees. You have, your company's name is on a high rise in Chicago. You've made some investments in office space. Like, what does office space look like in the future? Is everyone going back to work, some staged? And how is day-to-day going to be different?
Yeah, I think, Amanda, what I'm going to try to bring back to work in the buildings is a more open mind on, to your point, what effective work, what first-class work can look like and be delivered by. Does it need to be physically together? Does it need to be synchronous in time? Can it be remote? Can it be asynchronous without being degraded in any way? And I think the genie's out of the bottle on that stuff. I really do feel like the world has proven an experiment that we never would have had the courage to take that experiment, that step in that experiment as a world unless we were forced to. But whether it's the tens of thousands of traders on Wall Street that recognize now, oh, actually that worked, or the telemedicine, or for tech companies like those that we're talking about here, frankly, is easier for many of us than it was for many of the companies in the world, both because we are generally using tech products in our companies and as a mindset more open theoretically to change. But I think the world has really proven that many more jobs and many more industries can be extraordinarily effective remotely. And it's going to be very difficult, I think, to prove to the generation of employees who are coming up that the old way of doing things is better, when the proof right now would suggest perhaps otherwise. So I'm going to bring an open mind and rethink I think like you, the many deeply shredded grooves I had in my mind about what great looked like. And it had to be one way, and I don't feel that way anymore at all.
Can you share any details about how many of your employees you think are going to come back and when, and what your sort of in the office, out of the office balance is going to be? Are you going to allocate times? Just like, how are you thinking about it, knowing that it's been nice?
So live conversation, we haven't made any formal decisions on it. We've been surveying our employees like many companies have. And, I think we resemble, in the US at least, there's different opinions outside the US, but just in the US, we resemble very much what you're seeing being published publicly with respect to other companies, which is, we had high single-digit % of our employees who were permanently non-office based prior to the crisis. And there's probably high teens % of our employees who would prefer to be back in an office right now. And there's about half of our employees who would be interested in potentially never being tethered to an office permanently. And I would imagine that when we come to a resting state sometime in the future post-crisis, what we're going to probably find is a work week that has been broken in the structure of it's got to be 5 days, it's got to be 9 to 5 in the office. And we'll probably have people choosing personal flexibility and personal choice, and they're going to wrap work around the life that they aspire towards and not the other way around.
Betsy, is this almost like never, if we can get past the fact that people were financially impacted and sick and there have been, going to be 200,000 deaths, is this almost a weird way a silver lining for your business? Not that we're making light of COVID at all, because you're not a co-working space, and this is a chance to really lead forward with the other aspects of acceleration and education and content. And how are you, with the space being, a hub, connecting, pulling people together, navigating going back, and what's it going to look like?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in there. So first of all, I'm also a landlord. So from a business model perspective, we're reimagining 1871 without place as our strength. And how do we, and the job to be done in many ways for much of what we do is shifted. So I agree with everything Mike said about like how work gets done and where work gets done, but there's also the work itself, in many respects, changed for my team. So we can dig into that if you want now or through the course of the conversation. I think in terms of preparing, our view of office space is not that office space is dead forever. Our underlying belief is that most people will come some of the time. And so that what that means for us is the need to be much more flexible in our structure with how we think about space. So not everything has to be a 2-year lease. We can guarantee clean conference rooms. Well, guarantee it. Lawyers or insurance companies are listening. I mean, we can do our best to make sure that that's all safe. We're helping people think about how do you actually get to the MART? How do you traverse through the MART safely? What happens when you get to 1871? What can you do? So we're quite clear on all that because we had to be to open successfully. And on the other side, though, in terms of innovation, I mean, I think this is a extraordinary time for innovators, and the problems to be solved are global, right? It's the first time, like probably in the history of the world, that now 7.6 billion people on the planet are all going through this crisis roughly at the same time. And so innovators like Garry, who have set up the PPE marketplace for the city of Chicago, and like Proxfinity, and like there's literally 300 or so that I've been working with in partnership with MHub and Matter. It is a launching pad like no other, and it compares to those companies that came out of 2009, but with a different lens. The last thing I would say, just a small thing in terms of and I think we'll get to this later, but with some people in the office and some people at home, the ground is shifting. Where before we were all in the office, and then we were all at home, and so the playing field was sort of even in both cases. And now we've got some people in the office and some people at home, and sort of that mix of asynchronicity and synchronicity changes. And if the combinations of people that are in the office are like making decisions really fast and not bringing other people along because they're not like literally there, I think that's gonna put pressure on my team for sure in the next couple months, and one that we have to pay attention to. And then the last thing I'll just mention is that the one small thing I started on March 13th, and I've done it every day since, is every morning, Saturday, Sunday, whatever, I just put a simple little Slack message into the admin channel to my team with, either a silly picture of my 7-year-old or my dog or something funny I heard, or just very short, requires no response. So this is not about like, you must work on the weekends, you must absorb it, but just that I'm thinking about the folks on my team. And now that rhythm, I don't anticipate changing that regardless of whether I'm in the office or not.
Isn't it weird that it took a virus to make people more human? I feel like there's never been more of a time when you ask somebody how they're doing over Zoom, they're like, let me slow down and actually answer it. And it's the strangest thing. It's people are so human now that we're not in the same room together, and there's so much compassion. Yes. Like a broad theme. I feel like people are like being more real.
Sonia's daughter has shown up in the picture there a couple of times, and my son will probably come in a minute and like look at my drawing. I'm like, I think I'm busy.
Sonia, VCs are notoriously, road warriors, and I've heard it said that you can't do a deal without looking the founder in the eye. how is this going to change the way venture works?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there are a couple of really good things that have come out of COVID on that road warrior side. I feel like at the earliest stages, especially, there's been a bias towards investing locally. And you see that especially from the coastal funds in San Francisco. Notoriously, they say if you're not a bike ride away from Sand Hill Road, some investors are reluctant to invest. And so my hope for Chicago is that COVID, to my point, has been a great experiment. There's no longer a local advantage, and I would welcome the competition for coastal funds to start doing more in the earlier stages in Chicago. I also think from a team construction perspective, in venture, there has been a bias against distributed teams. And myself, having run kind of large product and engineering teams in my past, even I can say that like I've had a bias in saying you need two-pair programming, people need to be sitting next to each other, and you get more efficiency that way, or you need the design team, engineers to be talking constantly in the same room and whiteboarding together to get to the best product. And what COVID has forced teams to do is just prove that for me personally. I think historically, if a team came in and was pitching and they were distributed, I probably would have counted that as a ding against that team. And now I don't think VCs are thinking about that the same way. And then the last thing that I hope, which is an observation and maybe a hope, is I think everybody's bringing their whole selves. We've talked a little bit about it. You will, my 4-year-old, for whatever reason, I don't know why she's not with Daddy, but she's popped in 3 times at least to ask for a lollipop because she thinks she's got negotiating leverage right now. But I'm seeing that across the board in all my calls. And it's not just the women, it's the men. My husband has the same issue with her trying to go, be a little terrorist and extort us for things when we're really busy on an important call. And so I feel like disproportionately women have been impacted by that in the past. And I feel like, or my hope, and I know that a lot of the COVID workload of parenting in addition to working is falling on women, but I think many men are seeing how much work is being done now. And when the work becomes visible and is acknowledged, I think there's a lot of power in that. And so I hope that some of the biases that may have existed are getting broken down in the process of everybody being forced to bring their whole self to work. So
let's drill down on that. I actually, when I was catching up with Mike before this call, we were talking about like what do you have to unlearn about work, and I think the day and age of like the Jack Welch command and control, heavily matrixed FaceTime in the office is really getting debunked. And I was talking to someone who said that it's the dregs of the Industrial Revolution when productivity on manufacturing lines, on assembly lines was in fact measured by time. The hours a worker was there did in fact yield productivity, and we have not ditched that and actually asked managers to understand quality and quantity of work, which is so much harder than just counting hours. But we brought it into really like high level, high thought work where it doesn't apply. And I think we're all getting uncomfortable with being like, when you work probably doesn't matter. And showing up and doing in-person things probably doesn't matter. And Mike went on this just like incredible, beautiful, like almost poetic riff. Like you're talking about like inclusive leadership. Like tell me, what do we have to unlearn about work, Mike?
Do you want me to replay our conversation, or you want like a new thought here?
No, just like the highlights of that. It's so good.
Maybe somewhere in between, but to bring everyone else along and part of our conversation, we were talking about, and to reset expectations, that it was like bumpy and not poetic, and I stumbled through it. So with a grain of salt, but I love your recollection better than my own on that matter. I'm gonna take you over.
I was like, man, I wish I had said that.
So what we were talking about is how sometimes in history disruptions allow for rapid changes that otherwise, minus the disruption, would have taken many years, or many fold as many years to play out. And we were talking about the 80s and leadership, and how at some point, and I'm 46, I remember growing up in the 80s, and my version of what a business person was, it was like a white man, and he was probably an ex-athlete, and he was tall and strong and physical stature and in mental state. And I feel like that's what media told me, and that's what the images of the 80s leader told me. And I was a product of my societal inputs on that. No idea if it's right or wrong, But somewhere along the way, that guy became no longer welcome as a leader in our current companies. If that same person who I'm picturing was a modern leader in one of our companies, he would have a ton of HR violations. He'd be fired long ago. And so that was 40 years ago. So if we take a facet like inclusivity, where in the 80s, I don't know, the word probably didn't exist, maybe the most avant-garde thinkers thought of it. And then in the 90s, this idea of just being maybe a little bit more open. By the 2000s, you really needed to have this skill set. And today, good luck being a modern leader unless you can actually modulate yourself to enable those around you of very different backgrounds, life experiences, and perspectives to be themselves, to bring their whole selves to work and to get the most out of what they can be. So there's been this 40-year arc in this change. When we think about the rapid shift, COVID-related things that have changed, and Sonia, thinking about your comment about on distributed teams and the bias that I held against them. I mean, for the last 10 years of my career, I've railed against, we need centers of gravity of physical locations around which careers can be built. And yes, you can move where you want, but I don't know if it's gonna be great for your career or not. And then boom, all that thinking's out the window. And I feel like in only these next 3 months, and however many months it's gonna take for this thing to be over, we have just catapulted through a transformation that is as significant is that which pushed out that 80s leader into being not welcome. I think so will be unwelcome and incapable the leader who doesn't understand how to embrace a fully distributed team and modulate herself to be able to manage different kinds of folks who are making different kinds of life choices, where they live, in what time zone, creating work in what kind of way. And so I think one of the silver linings for me in this horrible pandemic is that we've just cut 20 or 30 years off an evolution that is worthy of evolving through.
I have to say, it's not just the pandemic. It's the success of the protests to bring to light the need for systemic change. It really is the national attention and longevity and realization where it's like, if I'm not part of the solution, I am part of the problem. And so I just think that it's like a really unique 1-2 punch, that we're not just surviving. We're saying
the complicity of inaction. I mean, I think that's a beautiful alternative phrase, and I think you nailed it in that.
So let's get specific. Let's get specific. We have people listening and they want specific actions. What are your companies doing to approach diversity, equity, and inclusion going forward? And as we think about the future of work, our title, how do we make the workplace safe and inclusive for everyone? Have you started anything, or do you have any plans worth sharing, or tactics that you think are going to move the needle to really create inclusive environments where people bring their whole selves to work and have kids here and dogs here? And I did wear a bathrobe for a while, and people at work told me to stop wearing a bathrobe because it really disturbed them. But like, so we're not wearing bathrobes, but like the whole individual, how and where and when they best do their work. Betsy, I'll start with you. Any strategies you can share that are actually changing work for the better for everyone?
Yeah, and I'll be specific with respect to the conversations I've had following the death of George Floyd and the following protests, and the conversations I've been having with Black founders, both as a group and individually. I think for us, the first thing was to acknowledge that moment and take responsibility for the fact that we hadn't acted with intent at the level that we should have, right? That I didn't understand the unique characteristics of different folks in the 1871 community, in this case, Black founders, and what they needed. And so, and I welcome Garry to jump on this conversation, of course, because he's been part of it. But I think from my view that this is we can't let this moment pass without real change, right? This is, I wrote a letter like everyone else wrote a letter. I hosted a conversation, lots of people posted a conversation, but what happens next is the most important. And what happens next will be a co-created agenda with the Black founders and members of the 1871 community. So we haven't landed on an answer, but thematically, I'll tell you kind of what people have been talking about. One is to really invest in building the pipeline and the community, whether those people are at 1871 or out in the neighborhoods. And for us, that's an extension of work that we're doing in the neighborhoods. Is to launch a specific Black founder accelerator. And that model is going to look different than Wisdom, and it's going to look different than Latinx, which we run today, because it's going to have different advisory associated with it, different people involved. I think there's a real opportunity for us to influence others that hold the purse strings on capital and hold the decision rights on pilots, on like literal access to pilots and customer development. We've got 100 corporate partners, right? I need to have a much louder voice. There's certainly themes around communicating goals and being much more transparent and holding ourselves accountable, to continue to diversify my board and my leadership team, things like that. But that I don't want to just, and then the last one is just being, we have a lot of partners, but being much clearer about partners that can support that particular community. And while I'm talking about Black founders and leaders right now, you could apply that same framework to women or to Latinx, and it's sort of a different answer to your question, Amanda, but I think it's sort of a theme around inclusivity. And again, the list I just shared is my synthesis of a whole bunch of conversations I've been having. The leaders like Garry and Stella and Adam Wisniewski and others are also working on kind of what's most important to them, and we will come together sometime soon and sort of land on this is the plan. But that's my reflection of where I think we're going to be putting stakes in the ground. But Garry, I don't want to take over Amanda's job.
Garry and Sonia.
Yeah, so I kind of have some kind of market insights, because Rheaply is a sustainability business, unabashed a climate tech business, and climate crosses over into kind of CSR. And so from the kind of corporate world, what we've been seeing is that ESGs, environmental, social, governance rules that will be starting to be implemented at a lot of Fortune 500 boards are going to probably push CEOs and C-suites to be more about outcomes when it comes to diversity than PR. So I'm excited about that being implemented. As well as I've talked to a lot of kind of C-suite individuals, and I think one of the things that they're going to be more intentional about is using their time to mentor people who don't look like them, whether they be in their company or whether they not be in their company. So I'm excited about that as market trends that I've been hearing over and over on calls that I've been on. From a startup perspective, and what we're doing at Rheaply is all lines of communication are always open. I always do one-on-ones with everyone on my team. We have 18 people now. That's getting harder. I will continue to do that. I want people to talk to me. I think it's important for me as a Black founder to be very open and vulnerable about the things that I'm going through to my team and to the community writ large. Because I think before, there were reasons why I or people like me might not say the things that we actually think or feel. I think those days are gone. And then lastly, one of the things that I always encourage, I encourage in the essay that I wrote that Mike mentioned, is that this is a time for everyone to use their platforms and use their boards and use whatever tools they have, their channels, so that people can hear people more who believe in all the outcomes that I think we all want, as opposed to the people who are screaming, who are asking for all the outcomes none of us want. So I think it's important for us to say the things that we think, and I'm going to do that in my position at Rheaply for sure.
Sonia, thank you, Garry.
Yeah, I mean, I think systemic change means we need to look at every single aspect of the tech ecosystem. And there's no doubt that venture capital has a lot of work to do, starting at the GP level and making sure that we have more Black GPs in Chicago who are making the decisions. And that means down the full stack. In order to make sure we have Black GPs, we need to make sure we have a pipeline of associates, senior associates, VPs, et cetera. There should be diversity in the whole stack. And, you know, right now, Chicago falls really short. And so I think that's the venture capital picture. Is we need to be thoughtful about who we're hiring at the earliest stages, at the associate level and mentoring. And and then also making some better decisions at the GP level as partnerships are expanding. And then from when we make an investment, how I think venture capitalists can do more good, to Gary's point, using the platform. Every VC at Series A, B stage or later has a vote in selecting an independent for a board generally. And I think another place where we can do a lot to improve the tech ecosystem is making sure that we're bringing on diverse board members and being really more critical. Because I think one of the biggest insights for me when I switched over from founder to VC is that there are so many things that are not a meritocracy. And there's so much subjectivity and there's so much network relationships that carries weight in who gets a board seat, who gets venture capital dollars. And so I just think, given the conversations that we're having right now that have opened everybody's eyes to what's already been there for many, many years, we have an opportunity to be more thoughtful about everything from before we invest, who we're hiring on our team, when we invest, what that decision-making process looks like, looking at our portfolios critically, and then after we invest, making sure that we're creating the right boards to support diversity and have a ripple effect in the community. So,
all right, I'm going to, at the risk of slightly putting you on the spot, I'm going to come back with just a question or an idea that I think if you bought into it, you could lead it. So Mike told me about the story of LinkedIn, how they were all white guys and they're like, we're going to change it and we're going to change it quickly. And they started at the top and they had utter intentionality in placing women in senior positions. And that very quickly changed the ranks of LinkedIn. Like that anecdote, that data set of like, it was intentionality of saying, we're gonna put women, we're not gonna measure women. We're going to put women into seats of power at LinkedIn. I remember the decency pledge when pre-Me Too, but like there were lots of headlines and Ellen Pao was at Reddit and men were like, I will not be a predator. And it's like, okay, that's a nice thing to promise. Like you should do that without signing a pledge. You shouldn't be a predator. What if there was a diversity pledge where we could get a bunch of like leading VCs to not write a check unless there is one person on the leadership team of color, female, one person on the board, and at least 1% of the cap table, just 1% went to Black Americans. Like there's a black, just like you just kind of come up like this is it, this is the bar, it's a low bar. If you can't hit it, I won't do it. And there's like a diversity pledge, and you change who gets checks based on a very low threshold of a commitment to diversity. Like, I think it would change the startup tapestry really fast. Can you make that a thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to make that a thing. I mean, I actually think when I think about like who creates power for VCs, the LPs. And so I really, one of the things that I've been talking in circles about is how do we get the LP community to stand up and say, we're not going to even invest in a venture fund to give them the power to make decisions on, king making and queen making unless they have a diverse partnership. And I feel like I want to focus always on the things that really matter, like general partners, decision-making abilities, like that diversity, because I do think, we got to focus on the numbers and the things that matter. So to your point, like I'm less about writing pledges and letters and more about like, show me the numbers. Like, what are the investors' track records? I will say in the beauty industry, one thing that I just saw happen in that category is there was a campaign called Pull Up and Shut Up, where the communities of shoppers basically message, and this happened across every single beauty brand that I saw for a moment in time last week. They asked companies to release the diversity numbers. And there was definitely some backlash. Like the real dollars, real outcomes change based on people's historical commitment to diversity. But I just feel like that level of transparency may be a starting point as well. Like, here's where we are, honestly. And I think Chicago Blend is trying to do some work there to measure and quantify. But yeah, I don't disagree with that as a concept to run with and figure out how to make that stick.
Thank you for sharing. That was great.
And actually, Garry, you've done some thinking on that topic. I thought that was almost like a layup for you. You're gonna jump in on that one?
Yeah, so I haven't briefed Amanda on this, but coming soon, there will be a very similar idea launched by Ablorde, Stella, Kristen from Paladin, and myself here in Chicago, with the backing of many of the founders that we all know in Chicago and investors, as well as Techstars, potentially Y Combinator. So there is something coming soon, exactly the way you described it, man. Very clairvoyant. I did want to add another idea, though, at the end of the pipeline, because I know Sonia was talking about VCs, which is another article I've been writing a lot over the last couple of weeks. I like writing. And I published an article in Forbes around changing how supplier diversity programs work. And I think if companies, large companies, think about their supplier diversity programs, actually, if they just read my article, it's free, there's an idea there that's basically what Google is doing. And it really gets to kind of redoing the definition of what is a minority-owned business. And I actually think that that could allow more people upward mobility into the market if major companies were to really think about what do they call a diverse supplier. I think there are other ideas on the other end of the pipeline and getting companies ready for a VC by really thinking about how to get more diverse suppliers into procurement.
Awesome. So we've hit on some pretty tough issues. Let's hit one more, and then we'll get into things like how do you build camaraderie. We'll get there. We'll end on and up. But just one more issue is there are a lot of people at home who are feeling anxiety or loneliness, and mental health is really top of mind. And we're also being more real. So it's coming to the surface more. People are talking about it more. We're aware of the stress that people are on. What are you doing right now to address the mental health needs of employees? And what would you be doing if money were no object? Let's start with Betsy. What would you do if money were no object to fully support the mental health needs of your employees and of your tenants?
Yeah, I mean, because if money were no object, I would probably have on-demand support available for anybody to access. Those members of my team that seek out support from mental health professionals do that through their insurance programs right now. But I think if money was no object, I would love to have a group of folks that were on demand, available, telehealth related kind of approach to that. That would probably be number one. Number two, which is less about money and more about just people being willing to embrace it, is we talked about it a few minutes ago, but I don't care when people do their work. Like if I am the oldest person on my team by a fair margin. There aren't many people that have kids on the team, but some of them do. And this has been a very, very difficult time. And so the conversations, it's put undue stress where you say, I don't care if you do your work from 6 to 10 or from 8 to midnight or from 4 a.m. to, like, it doesn't matter. And by the way, when you take out the construct of an 8-hour day, which I think, Mike, you might have mentioned earlier, and you say, how much time does it actually take me to do my work? It can be much more concentrated and give people that flexibility and freedom to show up for their family first and for themselves first, and then their work second. And so that's less about, having extra dollars and more about just giving people the release hatch and making it okay. And modeling that, frankly, with my own life. I'm a single parent of a 7-year-old. My son just finished first grade. He told my brother, his uncle, that if I'm responsible for his second grade education, he will never get a job. So there's a low level of confidence in my household for my education ability. And there are days where I don't even know if he lives here, right? Because I'm just working all the time. And so I think the free option is to basically give people the right to make some choices on their own. And for me, it would be on this kind of on-demand access to external resources that we don't currently offer, both and founders, and my team.
Yeah, same. Sonia, team and founders, what are you doing, and what would you do if you could wave a magic wand?
Yeah. So one of my favorite things that I've seen one of my companies do during this period is they've started a program where they give one mental health day a month, which I think is important for people to have time and space, especially during this COVID time where lines have really blurred. And then if money was no object, I think executive coaching or therapy, which, these two things are kind of similar, is so beneficial. It's something that benefited me early in my career. And I feel like that's something that when we come in as a fund, often we'll recommend for our executive teams is that they hire executive coaches for the entire executive team, just with the recognition that great teams build great businesses. And so investment in the future, and something we believe in. And I think, if people could afford to do that across their entire organization, just imagine how communication and relationships could improve and what like a great work environment that would be. So that's mine was no object.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Garry, you're a super high EQ leader. I know you talk a lot about, mental health. You got any great ideas? Any wish lists?
Yes, I apologize for the UPS delivery that I'm sure is at my door right now, which is the sound you might have heard. So when I write an offer letter at Rheaply, I ended by saying, "Welcome to our family." And so what we've just extended that analogy. So like, for instance, one of the things we've done is in our team meetings, we each present a slide. I say, take a picture of something that's living in your home and put it on the slide. So the really cool thing is you see people's babies, you see people's dogs and new cats and old cats, you see plants, and it kind of brings a sense of that extended family that we don't see to the fore and to the team. So that's one thing that we've been just trying to kind of find little small ways to kind of bring what's really happening into the actual team structure. The other is shout out to a 1871 company, gfpchicago.com. Please go to that. They deliver fresh fruit and vegetables for $20 in a big box next day. And so for Memorial Day, I bought the entire team fresh fruit and vegetables, and we're all cooking, and we're all like, hey, what did you do with that cauliflower? I'd never actually made cauliflower myself. What did you do with this vegetable? So I think it's just finding ways to have community around the same things that we're all going through and be unabashed about doing so.
Amazing. Mike, what about Relativity? You got the big bucks.
It's all relative. It's all relative. But we're a company that's a little further along. We feel grateful for being able to take care of our employees. And so there's definitely some programmatic things that we do. We are able to offer counseling services for folks who are interested in it. We invested in a meditation app in Headspace for all of our employees. We moved to a discretionary time off, so you can take off as much time as you need. But I think those are important and those are helpful. But I feel like the bigger construct, at least what we're attempting to do, number one is just talk about it. Mental health is still stigmatized. And I feel like as a leader, we need to talk about it more so that the many people who are struggling with various types of mental health issues right now in this pandemic, it may be more acute, but it's actually a large swath of the population, that they can just feel it's okay to own that as you would any other health thing you're going through. And so just opening the conversation is I think an important step for any leader. I think also trying to do a little bit of work on causality and attack at the root what you can. We can't change what's happening everywhere. But if, for example, you're feeling anxiety that your toddler is going to come in, let's be explicit. It's okay. If you're feeling anxiety that you're in like many of our employees, both partners are working and there's maybe a parent to take care of or children, what have you, and they have to split and shift, it's okay. And let's communicate very actively about our financial position as a company so that good or bad, you know where we are and you don't have to worry into the vacuum of ignorance of our place. Am I safe financially? And so we're communicating all the time, videos several times a week, emails several times a week to the whole company, all hands every week. So the pace of communication, really trying to be proactive, to speak to what we do know and what we can control as just one means of trying to reduce the stress for the unknown, and then just creating some space for people to take care of themselves if they can. If I could wave a magic wand and money was no anything, I think I would want to invest in huge spaces for people so that when we are in these confined life moments, that people have enough space to kind of walk around and move around and not bump into their roommate or not have those other pieces of friction that can happen in life that get amplified by limited space.
Amazing. As you were talking, it reminded me of one of the things I was talking about, the humanity. Fidelity, a big traditional financial services company that you never see them sweat. They now are recording messages of the CEO sitting in her home office, and it's just so human. It's like, oh, that's her dog, and it's like the CEO of Fidelity, and that is us, like letting down the guard, and I think for the best. Just one more pro tip for listeners. I think because there's nowhere to go, we at Jellyvision had seen employees just not taking vacation. And that actually increases burnout. So we said, we know you can't go anywhere, but it's really important you cancel Zoom meetings and turn off Slack and try to take some vacation time, even as we're waiting to find out, when we can leave our houses again. Just making sure that there's room to unplug and stop is we found it at least helpful on our end. Kind of coming back about best routines for tracking and raising morale. How is everyone tracking and raising morale? Mike's very similar. We walk around, we look at where there's furrowed brow. We're like, how's everybody doing? We can't do that. There are hundreds of workers at Jellyvision, and I see 8 of them every day, the same 8. And it's like, how do you know how it's going outside of your team or within your team? Like, does anyone have any great ways of like unique techniques that are COVID born that are just like great way for like checking in?
I'm all ears. This is something that we're thinking about.
One of my companies is doing virtual, this is not that novel, but they're doing virtual happy hours as a way to still have that kind of water cooler FaceTime temperature check, in addition to some of the quantitative, less qualitative survey techniques. But I think that, while virtual work is great in so many ways, there are some things that are lost, like the ability to pop in and check in on somebody or see their facial expressions in high full clarity. And so I think trying to recreate that offline mechanic online with Zoom virtual conference calls or chat, happy hours, is one technique, but I don't have any magic answers that I've seen yet.
I talked to someone at Zapier, and they do something called red, yellow, green, which is they make everyone on the team give themselves a color, and then you explain why, and it can be personal or professional. And I just did it with Jellyvision's senior leadership team, and I don't mean to tell tales out of school, but there was an awful lot of yellow. And I was like, wow, maybe we should slow down and be like, what's going on? What's actually going on? And another idea that's a VP of implementation at Jellyvision, a woman named Alex Meal, she used to get her team together, and at the end of the week, they'd be like, best week ever, why? And she changed it to Slack, and now it's okayest week ever. And people just put it in, like, it's like we're setting like expectations down, but it's still like, it's like a ritual of checking in. Everybody does it. It's funny. It's asynchronous. It's no pressure. Mike, you got any great ideas for like checking morale that's not just like, usual engagement surveys or something like that going on at Relativity?
I don't think any great ideas. I can tell you, some of the things, and some of the things that we're doing is just recognizing the importance of frequency of communication and increasing that cadence. So whether it's, from my viewpoint out, whether again, I hold the iPhone and I give a little corny video a couple of days a week, and they're not like particularly great, and they're always, just one take, and so they're imperfect, but that at least asymmetrically allows my team to feel me. How I try to feel my team, so I've increased the number of skip levels and the frequency of those. And like I said, we went from one all hands a month to now every week, and we do a separate one for our Director Plus community. So I think frequency of touch point. And then maybe the last thing, as we're a B2B software company, and so we often live through the stories of our customers, and their triumphs are our triumphs. There are a lot of triumphs that our customers have. And so bringing those stories into the company and making sure that the connection between our employees' hard work and real good that's going on in the world can be felt by those people who are creating the origin point for that good. And a number of our customers have been using our software in incredibly creative and innovative ways that are related to this pandemic. And so I'd say these stories of customer success fill us up.
That is a great way to celebrate. Yeah, let's go. Betsy, what are more ways to track and celebrate?
I think similar, we wouldn't think about it as customers, but for entrepreneurs that are doing amazing things, or growth scaling companies that are doing amazing things, we celebrate those inside the team and make sure that people know the headlines. And then, as I mentioned earlier, these little daily shout outs to the team almost everybody responds with some kind of emoji, and those emojis range from something that is applicable to whatever I wrote or something completely random. But I count the emojis, and I have 33 people on my team, so I know, as long as people aren't putting 2 or 3 emojis down, I know roughly how many people are responding, and I loosely keep track of that. And if there are some times where there are people that, like, for 3 or 4 days don't respond at all, and then that's a signal to me that I need to check in with them personally. And it's not a high pressure check-in. It's just a, hey, just was thinking about you, wanted to just check to see how you're doing. And then, at my skip level, I do quite a few skip levels, as Mike said as well. But I just use that little emoji check. So if anyone on my team is listening, they now know the only tracking mechanism I actually have.
Secret's out.
Secret's out. Yeah.
We did chamber reflections.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask her one more question. You just reopened 1871. Did you do anything to celebrate the first few people coming back?
We did not. We are. We celebrated inside a team meeting that we were open, and we did a little thank you for the 4 people that really were on the team that helped make that happen. We have not done any more formal celebration than that. I think we're trying to. We've got, of the 33 people, we've got 7 or 8 that have signed up to be part of the rotation, and so I think we're slow rolling that a little bit. Yeah. So we celebrate that we're open, but just sort of quietly.
Gary, you cook, you take pictures of plants. What else you got? You seem to have quite the repertoire.
We had what we call Rheaply reflections, and what that is that people go to a certain Slack channel, they write a reflection that they had for that day, and as many people in that company who agree with it by just selecting an emoji, we actually just publish that exact reflection on our social media channels. And so for probably the first 60 days of COVID, people were seeing a lot of thoughts from me, but they were from my team. And so that's one way that we try to operationalize that.
But you got a playbook. I see another blog post coming from you. So anything you've heard from your portfolio companies, or any great ways people are celebrating remotely?
Yeah, I think the happy hours, the all town halls, things to try to keep people connected would be the thing that I've observed the most. And then I think people are doing small things to reach out to each other. One of the things I really liked that you said was the permission to not be okay. It sounded like things went from what's great to how are we having the okayest week ever. And I think that level of vulnerability, when it starts at the top, it gives permission to everybody else in the organization to have those conversations that Mike talked about that are more real, more authentic, more vulnerable.
We haven't done the following, and I know you got to close soon, but I heard this from somebody else, that as a team event, they did the House Hunters International, so different subgroups of teams picked a international location and had to pitch that house to the rest of the group, and they had to pretend dollars, and they got to buy the house. I think that sounds like fun. We haven't done it yet.
That's what I'm talking about. Those ideas. You know what I do? I show up and I drink. I don't do anything like that. I just drinking a bowl of wine,
Then I'm going to bring you a real idea, Amanda. Our head of product, Chris Brown, had a wonderful idea. And for the first 10 weeks of the crisis, he did the Relativity at Home Challenge, which was once a week, he would do a broadcast and say, this week it's build the most amazing fort or create a fantasy playground. And then families around the world would work on it all week with their kids or solo or have you at age groups. And then we'd record a 1-minute video. People would vote on it, and you'd be awarded the winner of that week's Relativity at Home Challenge.
That's awesome.
That's amazing. That's amazing. We are out of time, so we're going to do our final speed round. If you had to write the definitive book on the future of work post-pandemic, what would the title be? Gary?
I had it down to 2. I'm going to say The Anywhere Office.
Sonia?
Distributed Together.
Betsy?
My teammate, the robot.
Nice.
And Mike?
Mine would be called Our Choice.
And I would read all of those books. Thank you to our esteemed panelists. Thank you to Chicago Inno, and thanks to the people who tuned in. That's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Hey everyone, just popping back on to give one final thank you to everyone. That was an amazing discussion, super insightful, super helpful. I know I took a lot away from that, so I'm sure all of our guests did too. So thank you again. Thank you, Amanda, for moderating. And a final thank you to our sponsors.
Amanda.
Rock. Seriously, thank you all. Thank you, thank you. You're amazing.
Oh, go Amanda.
Inno plans to host more virtual events like this in the future, so please look for them at chicagoinno.com and in our newsletter, The Beat. Otherwise, thanks again to everyone, and we'll see you next time.
See
Yeah,
ya.
everybody. Great to see your faces.
Bye.
See ya. See you on the web.